Thanks for your patience, everyone. We will resume the meeting. Thanks to staff for their advice. Councillor Beattie has modified the recommendation to the one on the screen, which is that the Chief Executive review the administration of the Local Initiatives Fund and the applications are put on hold until this is completed. So the fund's not open at the moment, and we anticipate that this could be done within a couple of months. So would still allow chance for the applications to be put in this year. Councillor Beattie, did you want to speak to that?
No, I'm comfortable with it. So
thank you. Are there any other comments? Oh, sorry, I'm just getting advice from governance. So just to clarify, we're not expecting a report to come back to council. It's felt that staff and the Local Initiatives Fund panel can meet together and review the administration of the fund to make sure that the guidelines are interpreted as generously as possible. Right, so we're into comment. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's probably more of a question to the mover. So we've gone within, looks like about 5 minutes of disestablishing this fund now to doing something different on the advice of an officer. Are you happy with that?
If I may, through you, yes. Madam Chair. Yes, I am, and it's because of the Local Government Act and things. And so we can tidy this up with the LTP.
Okay.
And talking to the officers, I'm comfortable that I'll get the outcome that we need. Yeah. So the answer, yes, without getting into.
So instead of taking the short road, we're taking the long road.
No, this is the short road, because disestablishing it would have been the long road, and we would have got into problems with local government legislation. So I think
on the advice of the officer, obviously.
And I'm comfortable with that, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, that's fine. No, cool. Thank you.
Further comment? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Further question, I suppose, of the mover. So the 28,000 or whatever that was sitting in this year. So what status does that have at the moment?
Once we've sat down and talked about it, it looks as though we may be able to get a better outcome if we change how the administration, and we can look at the policy and see if we can broaden it. So therefore the same panel may be able to allocate that money in a broader criteria so that into the community. If it can't, after discussions with the officers and the administrators, if it can't, then I will bring it back to council. But at this stage, I feel that this is the best way to do it. Otherwise, it's got to come back here in 3 months, and then we might not get the answers we want, and then we'll have to do another recommendation. Then we're going to get further down towards the end of the financial year, and then we'll lose the money.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Just briefly to comment, I suppose my creative mind would have just changed the funding allocation to 0 and left it established, and you know, give us a more direct way there. But I'll support the mover and proposal here.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for my information, I guess it has been postponed or changed due to the Local Government Act. Can somebody tell me how easy it is in the Local Government Act to change the criteria for this fund? Because that's what we are going to do.
Is Julie wishing to answer that for Councillor Butt? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The fund is set up under the community funding policy, which was publicly consulted and adopted by council. So any changes to the criteria of the fund would be through a publicly consulted policy review process, which we expect to do as part of the 10-year plan. What Councillor Beattie is commenting and saying is that there is such flexibility within the criteria of the fund that perhaps the objectives that she's seeking can be achieved in other ways without a formal review or a revocation of the fund.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'd just like to make a comment. I do commend Councillor Beattie for attempting to find some resolution to this issue. It has been a source of frustration for community groups repeatedly applying to this fund and not being successful and not really understanding why. And from the perspective of making best use of funds, it's also frustrating for me to see money sitting in a fund for a year and then going back into council coffers at the end of the year, so we can't give it out to anyone. So it seems that we may be able to approach this for this financial year, not by changing the criteria of the fund, but by changing the interpretation of the strictness of the criteria, if you follow that nuanced approach. And then we can review the policy as part of the 10-year plan and consult on that. Whereas disestablishing the fund would be in contravention of our own policy. And so that's why I received that advice, for which I am grateful. So are there any further comments? Are we happy to take 1 and 2 together? Because 1 is just acknowledging the receipt of the report. Okay, so we'll take 1 and 2 together on the voices. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you. So we'll move to item 10, which is the report back on the community development small grants allocations for 2020-2021, presented by Joanne Ransom. Thank you, Joanne.
So this is another fund where the community funding policy requires that successful recipients be notified to council. Last year, the policy was not followed and there was considerable discussion around the council table. We have made certain that the policy was followed this year, and thus the process might feel unfamiliar to you, to councillors who are used to the Community Services Council presenting directly to council. The purpose of this fund is to provide funding for essential administration expenses to enable community groups to operate. The process is delegated to the Community Services Council, who run the applications, decision-making, manage the payments and the accountability. Of particular note is that this year arts and environmental groups received funding as well. There is an error at 5.3. The emergency grant was not drawn upon in 2019-20, not 2018-19, as I've typed into the report. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Joanne. Questions? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Joanne. So just circling back through the reports that have been presented today, why is this fund managed through the Community Services Council when we do all of our others internally?
So this is, I'm hoping I'll get a nod from Rebecca. So the community funding policy stipulates that the Community Services Council administers this fund. So council made that decision in approving the community funding policy 2018.
So that would be something that we might reconsider through the long-term plan process as just discussed.
You may indeed.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Joe, for the report. Good to see that there was some uptake in that sort of initiative to broaden things. Just wanted to understand the sort of forward intention around how this will be promoted broadly in the future.
So we did what we could this year in terms of asking our partners in different sectors to promote the scheme. The one thing that we do want to do differently is to make sure there is representation on the decision-making panel for the next time. So we've had to do it in a couple of different steps. But certainly it's about promotion and making sure that those different sectors know that it's available.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Joe, I've just got a couple of questions. One is under 3.1, it says that in September last year, the allocations for 18-19 were reported to council. Should that be the allocations for 19-20? Because this year we're talking about the allocations for 2021, and I'm wondering.
Yes.
is there a year?
No, I think you're correct. The decision, it gets confusing because the
Yes.
decision panel meets in June of the previous year
Mhm.
so that the grants are ready to be paid out immediately in
At the
July.
start of the financial
So
year.
I think that's
So
right.
that's probably the 1920. Yeah. And in terms of the numbers of applications received, this year it was 69. From memory, that's a big increase on last year. Is that right?
No, it's within CUI. Oh, sorry, Emma's correcting me. I thought it was within CUI. Within 5 or so?
No. Yes. That's what I was thinking. So 54 last year, and I believe it was 53 the year before. So that is a significant, well, whether we decide it's significant or not, it is an increase in the numbers of organisations making contributions. The other question I just wanted to ask was, in terms of the distribution, I assume that all of those who applied got funds, but were prorated down, as has happened in the past?
So all of the eligible groups
Mhm.
got funding.
Right.
They either received 100% of what they asked for
Mhm.
if it was less than a prorated amount.
Right.
So that's how that was determined.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So I will move the recommendations that the report be received for information and that Community Services Council be acknowledged for their assistance in administering the fund. Seconded Councillor Bowen, and I'll open it up for any comment. Okay, I have a comment to make. First comment is to thank Community Services Council because I know that this is a large amount of work, and for their diligence in checking in with organisations and making sure that their applications are up to scratch and being able to assure themselves that the organisations are eligible and put their best application forward, because I think that does make a difference, and not all organisations are experienced in applying for funding, as I think Councillor Dingwall mentioned before. The other point I think we should be aware of is that this fund has become a popular fund. We've intentionally widened its scope. I don't feel, in my personal opinion, that we've increased the budget sufficiently to compensate for the increased scope that we've put on this particular funding. And I think that is something that we need to consider going forward in the long-term plan. So that it's always been oversubscribed, but particularly this year, I notice it's very heavily oversubscribed. So I'll just make that point. Okay, so with that, then no further comment from anyone else. We will vote. Happy to take the two together. So we'll do it on voices. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Abstentions? That is carried. Thank you. So item 11 is the Safety Advisory Board Strategic Plan, which was presented by Patrick Hancock, who's chair of the Safety Advisory Board, and Joanne Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really happy to present this update of the work of the Safety Advisory Board, and I'll hand over to the Chair, Pat Hancock, to speak to it.
Thank you, Joe, and and thank you to the officers for preparing the report on the board's behalf. Probably just to kick things off, there's just a couple of corrections that need to be noted. One is under paragraph 3.2. Just needs the inclusion of Palmerston North City Council as a stakeholder, which was just missed inadvertently. And going to the next page, page 39, just under the experience statement, line 4, have positive relationships and will feel empowered. Delete the comma and just insert the word to, so that'll just make that population experience just make a little bit more sense. So I guess just to update you is that the Safety Advisory Board, we did have a little bit of a delay or some disruption through COVID-19, but the board was able to meet virtually through the lockdown period to commence the, we actually commenced the strategic planning in March, but we're able to carry on with some of that work virtually during the lockdown period. So the SAB has been using results-based accountability as the foundational to actually complete its strategic planning. And what we actually have decided to do is actually progress to a broader base where the Safety Advisory Board can actually focus on some of the underlying causal factors that underpin community safety issues around our city. So if you actually look at the population experience, so the planning at this stage, there is a population outcome, of course, which is around Palmerston North as being a safe community, but the important change really sits in the population experience. And if you actually read through that, you'll see that there are a lot of pieces of information in there which makes the work of the Safety Advisory Board far more relevant to all of the member organisations or participating organisations that belong to the Safety Advisory Board. So what we've actually done is we've actually added also the Ministry of Education, Kāinga Ora, Housing New Zealand, and the Fire and Emergency New Zealand to the board membership this year. In terms of next steps, there's work to be done around sort of refining the indicators, which is really sort of the turn the curve kind of conversation, so where we can actually start to implement some strategies to actually change some of the community outcomes and obviously change the population experience. We also need to be, we're also starting to build the organisation scope in the Safe City ecosystem, which is the appendice. And we're actually starting to do a little bit of work just around reviewing the terms of reference for the Safety Advisory Board. In terms of the Safe City accreditation, the city was re-accredited last year, 2019. Re-accreditation does not occur again until 2024, and Joanne and the officers within the City Council are actually doing a lot of work making sure that we're actually recording statistics and things like that that will actually go towards Safe City accreditation 2024. So we won't get distracted by having to do all of that work just leading up to that re-accreditation point. Probably the last thing I'd just like to say is that the SAB can have favourable impacts on all aspects of wellbeing, and so will have relevance to actually all of the committees within council and council itself. So that's pretty much just an update for the Safety Advisory Board, so prepared to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I will kick off with a couple of questions. The first one is around the indicators in 4.4. So I just wondered why those particular indicators had been picked, rather than, say, for example, drug use, availability of alcohol, rent affordability, etc., etc.
So we went through a workshop where we considered 144 potential indicators that we could have selected, and we went through and rated them in terms of how readily available they were, so with what frequency, how specific they were, how targeted they were, how easy it was to get the data. So we cut it down to a shorter list of about 40-ish, which we then workshopped again. So we've reduced it down to this, simply because we can't have too many. So we needed to keep it quite nuggety. And we were also trying to look at lead indicators rather than the following, end ones. So this is our list that we're working through. We're now going through and actually trying to extract the last 3 years of data out for Palmerston North City for each of these. And some of that's actually not proving quite as clean as we hoped it would be. So it might well be that we have to go to a different source, but we'll still be looking for something in here. So there were a couple of workshops which arrived at these indicators.
Oh, thank you. And in terms of the table in 4.2, there's been quite a change in the priority areas of the previous vision compared to the new strategic plan. I'm just have a slight concern that maybe, I mean, I understand having a positive approach, but maybe it's gone quite broad into a wider community wellbeing sort of focus, and might lose focus on things like, you know, the road safety, the alcohol and drug harm, and so on. Have you got a comment on that?
Yeah, I probably do. And the reality is that where I guess we find wellbeing deficits in communities, we also find undesirable outcomes. So therefore, it's very important that the Safety Advisory Board actually take a very broad view of the role of safety and also the definition of safety. So like all of those things, you know, housing, healthy lifestyles, education, employment, income, all of those things actually contribute to some undesirable outcomes, particularly in our marginalised communities. So we need to keep a very, very broad view of that. Okay,
thank you. I'll just open it up to other councillors for questions. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Joe and Pat, particularly you, Pat, for taking time out of your day to come and present to us. I'm not sure what else head on. I've just got one question. Under 4.4, where we have got the focus area and the indicators, when it comes to the housing, and there's the indicator is obviously the public housing waiting list. I'm just wondering, is that specific to Kairanga Ora, or does that include the council's wait lists as well? And probably in a broader question, the other indicators, do they include the lead agency's statistics, or are they broader to allow for others that work in that space as well?
So the public housing waiting list is the Kairanga Ora list, and that's because there is a lot of duplication. People often appear on both our lists and that list, so we've chosen that one to go with. And in terms of the lead agencies, we've tried to get the most authoritative source of data, so long as it's precise as we need it. Mm-hmm. So it has to kind of meet the Palmerston North City scope rather than Mid-Central District Health Board parameters. So we've tried to get it as specific as we can and from the most authoritative source that we can.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you both for the report. At a recent District Health Board meeting, we were informed that the reporting mechanism for the locality planning and the Palmerston North Health and Wellbeing Plan was directly to the Safety Advisory Board. And at the time, I was a little bit surprised to hear that, but they said that they had trouble finding an appropriate forum for that mechanism of reporting. Now that I read this report, I see that there's a very broad approach to the Safety Advisory Board in terms of its focus and priorities, which I would describe as much more of a health and wellbeing focus. And I can certainly see the connection between health and wellbeing and safety. But I guess the question I have is, with that scope becoming quite broad, do you think Safety Advisory Board is still the appropriate name for this group, or whether that actually the purpose of the group should be reconsidered, or the name of the group should be reconsidered to better reflect actually what it's becoming?
Yeah, look, thanks, Karen. I think, and that's a really good point. And I think that, like at the moment, the Safety Advisory Board is actually going through this kind of sort of this strategic rethink and reset process. And of course, it always comes to mind that when you actually start to broaden out your base, that you might in fact actually be starting to, dipping your toes into the water that actually belongs to somebody else. You know, other organisations, other collaborations actually already have some of the kind of the issues already covered. So we've still got some way to travel in respect of the planning and the direction of the Safety Advisory Board. During that process, I am sure that we will actually question whether or not Safety Advisory Board is the appropriate name for the board. But also we'll be very mindful that, for example, we have Danielle here today, and Danielle is actually sitting on Aura Connect, which of course is looking at sort of the, I guess, some of the social issues and some of the opportunities to actually make some meaningful change to some of our more marginalised areas within Palmerston North. Now, we don't want to be in competition with Aura Connect. We actually want to be working collaboratively in a very meaningful way with other entities, other collaborations like Aura Connect. So we have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that we knit these kind of things together so that we actually get strength rather than weakness.
This links to the health board coming to say, look, we think that we could report to the safety advisory board. So that means that we don't need to put our focus specifically on developing that health stream, because that work's already been done. So that report's kind of up. It contributes to the big picture. So we're trying to stay up here.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for the update. I guess just was wanting to understand some of that transition too between the prior focus and the new focus that's been signaled, and particularly those areas that have fallen out of scope in terms of where you see the future. Where do you see that going in terms of things like road safety, just being dropped out of here? Was there a conversation with some of the stakeholders around where that gets picked up and championed again, or would things just dropped?
Thanks, Brett. Look, I'm picking that your conversation is sort of, I suppose, couched in the terms of, like, say, for example, road safety. Like that, just because it's specifically not actually mentioned within sort of the strategic planning that's actually been done to date doesn't mean to say that that actually gets dropped out of and it becomes unimportant. All that stuff is actually still there, because that's the thinking at the moment is that members of the Safety Advisory Board in the past, one of the problems that has happened is that you actually have got member organisations that come along, and if we take a very narrow view of, or the definition of safety, then of course, we tend to think just about crime, road crashes and some of the things that are really obvious. Now, if I can actually perhaps just explain sort of some of the thinking is that, and it goes back to what I've mentioned before about Aura Connect, is that I was a police officer for 44 years. And I can tell you that the police have policed the same populations using the same techniques for 45 years and nothing has changed, right? So what we actually have to do is we actually have to change up our thinking so that we think of things in a much broader context. And those organisations that sometimes have felt that their participation on the Safety Advisory Board have been undervalued, what I'm actually trying to do now is actually revalue their participation and solicit from them their strengths. Does that help?
Thanks. Yeah, that does clarify. If I can follow up with one further question, just very welcoming of the signal around looking to address root causes, but then thinking about some of those KPIs and sort of working back from a KPI to actually addressing the root cause. Has the board sort of worked out the connections between and what needs to change, or is that sort of the next piece of work that comes in the board's activity?
So the next piece of work is a workshop on the 20th of August, and that's where we'll be facilitated, and we'll have 5 tables, one for each focus area, and those tables will have the lead agency and then other agencies working with a very specific focus on that area, plus also bringing in some of the NGOs in the community who have a very, very deep knowledge and understanding of the issues. And then we'll be going through a turn the curve conversation. So looking at the data, seeing how it's tracking, seeing if we're happy that it's tracking that way, trying to understand why it's tracking that way, identifying what interventions could happen to get that curve turned, and working out who the partners are in the community that could be working together to develop actions and initiatives to try and get a positive change. So that work's coming up. So this is like almost an interim update report. And then there'll be another report to come. We're hoping to bring that in November.
Great, thank you. Thank you both, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hancock and Joan. With 4.4, the focus area youth and the indicators there, it says in there youth suicide rate per 100,000. Is that 100,000 or 10,000 or?
No, that was an indicator that was selected. So I've since gone back to Statistics New Zealand, sorry, the Mid-Central District Health Board, and asked for a different measure because, of course, that doesn't scale to Palmerston North. We don't have 100,000 people, let alone 100,000 youth. So we're actually going to get actual counts. So that's the indicators. That's one of the ones that needs to be changed. So we're kind of going through, and as we're trying to extract good data, we're realising that some of them, and that was the particular one yesterday that we found that just doesn't map.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Pat, Joe. Look, having had a little bit of time on the Safety Advisory Board, and obviously like Councillor Dennison, I was temporarily a chair there for a while after you had left, Pat, in your other role. But my take on this, has the focus really changed, or are you just communicating what the SAB really does better and clearer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and yeah, thank you for caretaking the chair for me for a period of time. Yeah, look, I guess it's really about making sure that we articulate it in a much clearer way. Yeah, it's very important that we kind of sort of gather everything up as we move along.
Yeah, because my take on it is it's always been interagency. It's just not been a police road safety. It's actually all the parts of the pie. So you've always had the DHB there that I can recall. You've always had MSD, ACC, and others. And all I think you've done really is given it a much clearer, communicating much clearer what you do.
Yeah, and I suppose the to underline anything that needs to be underlined probably is that just making sure that the organisations who actually are participating organisations actually feel relevant and vital to the role and the outcomes that the Safety Advisory Board can achieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Comment, sorry. Any further questions? Danielle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. Just in terms of 2.4, I noticed that there's the 4 areas of wellbeing, and in particular, there's the social and cultural. I kind of get a good feel for the social and health and wellbeing, but I don't really get a feel for the cultural aspects. If you look at the experience statement, there's actually nothing in there about cultural appropriateness or respect for cultural diversity. So I just think that perhaps a bit more work is needed in that space, and I just ask how you're going to kind of strengthen that area. That's my first question.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Look, and probably a point well made, and certainly taken on board. I guess the opening statement there of the experience statement is people will feel safe and secure, feel connected and valued as a member of the community, and I guess that speaks to all people. Yeah, and there are probably sort of and people have a sense of place, belonging, and hope, and so I think that speaks to the faces of all of the peoples of this area and our city. Perhaps not. It's perhaps it could be perhaps termed in another way, but that's where we've landed at the present time.
And my second question was the attachment. So are you saying here that all these organisations are part of the Safety Advisory Board? or are these organisations that are doing work in the various spaces?
So it's the latter. Near the top, we've got it's agency representatives only on the Safety Advisory Board. And what we've identified now are a number of work streams who will work with other agencies, but we need to be working in partnership with the NGOs in our community. So this is a provisional map of the ecosystem. So this has got all of our SPG funded organisations on here and some other groups. It's not complete, and we're in the process of trying to fully populate this ahead of our workshop on the 20th, so that we understand who the potential community partners are that we could work with. So this is just to give you an indication that we want to be deeply embedded in the community.
Okay. Can I just add a comment while I'm talking?
Oh, sorry. No, the comments
not
will
yet.
come afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Thanks for the report, Pat and Joe. I'm happy to move the two recommendations, seconded to Councillor Bowen, and I'll open up for comment. So Danielle, do you want to go with your comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just note that you have Whakapai Hauora sitting under potential DHB. Whakapai Hauora, as you know, is part of the iwi, and we actually have a treaty partnership with the DHB. So I just wonder if you should give thought to maybe having iwi out to the side and having our kind of health and wellbeing organisation sitting under there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge the Safety Advisory Board just for the capacity and experience and influence they all bring. They've the commitment through that board is every key sector, and they bring their highest personnel available to be represented on that body. And so safety has been the focus with the relationship through the accreditation through Safe Community Foundation, but the other work that falls out can be broadened, and I'm very comfortable. I believe the organisation has evolved, I guess, going through that last process, and see where it can pick up different elements. I'm very comfortable about the transport or the roading focus being adjusted. I don't have an issue with that, and I support the broader approach. The other thing that come about that's been quite a shift is this results-based accountability with the collective impact, and that's a model that a lot of the government agencies have moved to in more recent years, and to take that approach into the Safety Advisory Board seemed to make a lot of sense to measure what they do in the organisations, but overall as the Safety Advisory Board. And yeah, thank you very much for reporting back today. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, just want to acknowledge Pat and the Safety Advisory Board, like Councillor Dennison, and acknowledge his prior work in the last term of chairing the board. Look, safety in a city is really, really important, and not every city can claim that they're safe, even in the world, let alone New Zealand. So the work the SAB does is really, really important to our city and our not only for our residents, visitors, being safe, but actually our reputation. It underpins our World Health Organization, a Safe City accreditation, and it ensures that all our agencies work together. And I think that's around that small city benefits is coming to the fore there. I think we can't underestimate the work streams too, and that's why I said I don't think the work that they're doing has actually changed that much over the years. They're perhaps just tweaking it and being really clear and communicating what they do. So you've still got the big ones there of crime prevention, road safety, ensuring that people feel safe in our city, ensuring injury prevention, drug and alcohol prevention, and above all resilience. So I just want to, because a lot of us don't have that much to do with the Safety Advisory Board, but it is important. So we've just got to acknowledge the good work that's done, and to you, Pat, for instigating and pushing along this draft of a strategic plan. I think is really good work. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add my comment. I do welcome the work of the Safety Advisory Board, and I obviously understand that organisations evolve. Probably have some concerns that we might be taking our eye off the ball here in terms of the drug and alcohol use and some of the crime stats and so on. If they're not specifically mentioned in the strategic plan and they're not accounted for in the indicators, how are we actually going to keep our eye on those important elements of safety? So while I appreciate a sort of a more positive approach on well-being, I'll just sound a small note of concern that those aspects of safety shouldn't get lost in the morass of a wider well-being kind of portfolio aspect. So, thank you. So if that's the end of comment, we will vote. We'll take the two of them together and we'll vote on voices. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 12, which is the feasibility of introducing a companion card for those with permanent disabilities. And this has been presented by Joanne Ransom. Welcome again, Jo.
This report is in response to a presentation from the Disability Reference Group to Council in September of last year. In assessing the feasibility of Council introducing a companion card scheme, it became apparent that while it appeared simple, it wasn't. And officers went to some length to understand the national context, as it would have been short-sighted to develop a local solution if a nationwide scheme was just around the corner, and it's not. While there is a will by government to introduce a nationwide scheme, there are challenges, which include an inadequate evidential base to build a program on, difficulties in confirming eligibility, and an inability to compel ticketed activity providers to participate. This report considers three options. The first is a local partnership. This is a good philosophical fit, as it's about community-led initiatives and local partnerships. It is a minimal cost, 10K cash, plus contributing our in-house marketing and design expertise. It overcomes the hurdle of confirming eligibility as it matches Mana Whakaha client base. And it's pretty quick. We can probably get this up and running in a few months as a trial. The second option is that we go it alone. It's possible, but challenging. It's expensive, and we have no mandate in 2020, 2021. So it will be a minimum of a year to wait. The third option was that we wait for government. It's a long wait, potentially, although choosing one would help build the evidence base and provide a case study to aid the cause. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Joanne. Questions? Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joan. So if we were to go down to choose option one, can you just clarify that this would actually give us data around using the card and the events that people are going to and the venues and all of that, so that we can actually gather this evidence for future use?
Absolutely. Mana Whakaha and the council will negotiate a contract and we'll make sure that we will agree the data that needs to be captured, and we'll also be working with Ministry of Culture and Heritage to see what their needs might be, to see if, and I hope that we can meet that. Sorry, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. Stop.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joanne. Joanne, there's a cap of $10,000. What happens if we start getting over subscriptions?
So the 10,000 is a nominal figure we plucked out of the sky. We simply have no idea. We know how many people could be eligible for a card, but we don't know often those cards will be used. We also don't know if our ticketed activity providers need to be reimbursed for the cost of providing a companion seating. They might be perfectly happy to do it without being recompensed. So what we wanted to do was nominate a sum, and let's see how it goes. If it's a wildly successful program, then that's a great problem to have, and we'll have to try and find some money from somewhere else, and maybe go back to District Health Board, or maybe we go to the Ministry of Health, who are partnering with us, or one of the other charitable funding organisations. That'd be a great problem to have, but it really is just a nominal amount at this point, and we're just saying let's just cap it at 10, but we really have no idea if that's going to be too much, enough, not enough.
Okay, and if, one more question. This is just for our ratepayers.
We're suggesting it's the client base of Manawhakaha, and I understand that's within the Mid-Central District Health boundaries. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my colleague Rose from Manawhakaha and seeking a head nod. I'm going to bring her up to the table.
So it isn't envisioned that it would be the disabled people within the mid-central region, primarily those who live in Palmerston North. Respectfully, not all of them will be ratepayers, but will be actually residents of Palmerston North.
So it's not going outside the boundaries like to Horowhenua and Wanganui and those?
I can't. There may be occasionally someone from the VIN who may wish to use a card here in Palmerston North, but no, initially it's people in Palmerston North. That would be our primary focus at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the end of your questions, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Joe, for the report. I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit the problem that we're trying to solve and then the way that it's actually addressed in the report. It seemed to me like the problem might be quite often that a person living with disability wants to go to an event, but sees that they have to actually pay double the cost. And so then they choose not to go to the event. Is that the typical scenario?
Yes, that's what we understand that we're looking at. Yeah.
So if that's the typical scenario, I'm trying to understand why it's being cast as lost revenue for the venue. Because they're not selling any tickets. We're giving them the opportunity to sell a ticket and then comp one. So I'm really struggling with this framing around lost revenue. Can you just help us understand that?
So the research that was carried out by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage identified the biggest risk to the scheme is that ticketed activity providers don't participate. So we could design a scheme with a card, and every person who is eligible for a card has a card, but if we can't get the buy-in from ticketed activity providers, then there's no point. So that was the biggest challenge, and to compel providers to participate would require a law change. So that's why it's kind of halted at this point. There were two mitigation strategies that were suggested, which was a really great marketing campaign, some really good comms to really encourage providers to participate. And then we thought an additional carrot incentive really for certainly for this trial to encourage our providers to participate was that they won't lose any income. I mean, arguably they might be seats empty anyway, but this is just an added incentive to really try and get some really solid buy-in during this trial.
I think the GM would just like to make an additional comment, please.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and I think Joanne's answered the question fairly well. What I would say is that, in a way, I look at this scheme a little bit like sort of your approach to health and safety, a really mature organisation that has a mature health and safety approach will do it without thinking. It's just something that you do. And I think actually as a society, we get more comfortable with just inclusion as being just something you do. I don't think we'll need to have those same sort of incentives because it will become automatic for organisations to say, if we're putting this on, we actually have to think about how we make it more inclusive for everyone. So you just make it available and it becomes a cost of doing business. I think what we're saying is at the moment, that's not really an environment we'll have to encourage people, and we might need a bit of carrot in there as well. But certainly I think that's where you hopefully get to, because your point is, what is the real cost? It's probably more a cost in some people's heads.
Thank you for that further comment. One further question from Mark. I suppose it's probably most clear to me in the 5.4.5 and 5.4.4 sort of area of the report, and you've touched on it a bit already, Joe, but just the sort of concern about, I suppose, how much control we would have over a ticketing agency or over a CCO. And I can understand in some cases, in some venues, but in cases where we own the venue, certainly the owner of the venue has some rights to actually determine how a ticketing agency might operate in a venue that we own. Is that, I guess, how far has that been explored? Because I felt like we didn't really dive deep there in terms of doubling down on our potential to actually drive some change here.
Yeah, look, I haven't gone heavy on this. We're really hoping that a conversation over a cup of tea and they'll see, of course, we want to be part of the scheme. And that's the right approach that we want. And definitely we've got some influence because we do pay the money. But also we don't need to underscore that in capital bold letters. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure we do have influence, even over things like the swimming pool where we have a contract for services. That's all part of the encouraging as wide an application as possible.
Thanks. So I well understand the softly approach. If that didn't work, where would you go next?
I'd talk to the executive leadership's team and see how they might like to proceed.
That sounds like there might be an answer coming from the top of the table.
Yeah, I think that was chuck it up. Look, I think it's a good point, and it was, we have had a lot of internal discussions about the extent to which we can compel people to participate and what have you. So that may well be the case, and it might well be that. So I suppose the way we're thinking is this year we, effectively treat it as a pilot. We get it going. I think this is the best chance of actually getting it going. We can explore some of those things, and it might well be through our statements of expectation, for instance, with our CCOs, we could make that as that we could express to those organisations, this is what we want to do. So look, ultimately you can, but I think as was mentioned right at the start, one of the challenges that we've seen as a country in terms of implementing the scheme nationally is the difficulty in terms of trying to compel people to do it. So potentially you could bring in a law and say you just have to, but it's a pretty big step. So there are some levers, maybe through statements of expectations, but at this stage we actually think the most powerful thing we can do is create a really good story and encourage people to be part of it. I'd really like to see how that would work.
Thank you all for answers, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report and the creative thinking that's gone into it, which I appreciate. I'm broadly supportive of where this is heading. So my questions kind of follow on in that back part of section 5 of the report. We talk about expressing our wish for CCOs and not wanting to go down the heavy-handed route as discussed. Has there been any conversation broadly with the CCOs or other parties?
Not yet. And can I just give the microphone to Rose for a moment, please?
And just in the discussion, something to consider is also many of the buildings where we might go and perhaps watch a performance. They're always only limited seats anyway. So it's not like suddenly 65 people in wheelchairs are going to take over a venue. There's only ever a limited number. So the amount of revenue loss, if we're going to look at that terms, would also be very limited as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rose. I think we'd all look forward to 65 people in wheelchairs taking over. That would be fabulous. But it does link nicely to my next question, which is about 5.5, just the unknown implications of increased demand from people with particularly physical needs in that space. So my question is about the recommendation 4, which suggests a report back after 12 months. And the report there is framed as effectiveness of the trial, I suppose. And my question is, should that be extended? Should that recommendation be extended to cover things like the things we don't know now? So implications for budgets, for facilities management, that kind of thing. That's what council would need to know at that stage.
Certainly my intention was with the word effectiveness that it was as encompassing, all-encompassing as possible, so that we brought back to council a really clear picture about the ramifications of the scheme. And again, that'll be a great problem to have if we found that our venues just were inundated with demand and we couldn't meet it.
Okay.
So I'm expecting that report will be comprehensive.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Finlay. Very well. Okay, Danielle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Joe. I see the Ministry of Health as a partner, and then they're going to contribute to the design of the card. Are they actually providing any financial resources into this project as well?
Yes, we are. I spoke to my director, Lorna Sullivan. Absolutely, finances as well as the backing things of the administration of the card.
Thank you very much.
All done for questions. Thank you. Thanks, Joanne, and thanks, Rose, for helping us through that one. So I'm happy to move all 6 of these recommendations, seconded Councillor Bowen, and happy to take comment at this point, if there is any. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Joe and Rose, for the report. Look, I was absolutely delighted to read this report and see the amount of work that's gone into looking to progress the companion card, which obviously I was delighted that the idea came up through the Disability Reference Group. And whilst we are all very clear on our goals as a City Council to be inclusive, what's become apparent is that there are some barriers to actually truly being inclusive. And as we work our way through trying to remove some of those barriers, this is a really great example of how we can look to do that, to ensure that all in our community can participate in the way that we would like to see. So I'm really excited and very supportive of seeing this progress. And I think the model of a partnership between the council and Manawhai Kaha is a really good model for us to be looking at. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the success of this. So thank you, and very supportive.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everything has to start somewhere, and there's small steps. I can remember some years ago a group of us going to meet when the minister was Winston Peters, a few years ago, and we had an idea from Great Power about something we called the gold card. Well, the minister thought it was a great idea, and he flew with it. Now, how many people under 65 in New Zealand don't use their gold card? It has gone across this country quite rapidly because a small group of people had an idea and they took it and they ran with it. Now, here we have a situation here in Palmerston North where we have a group of people coming to us and saying, let's start a companion card. It might not go nationwide overnight, but let's be the city that started the companion card off in New Zealand. That'd be something for us to be proud of. The companion card started here in Palmerston North, and it might just be the places like the Globe, the Lido, and 1 or 2 other places, the Regent, that will start it off. But things like the theatres will come in. It will grow, but let's make a reputation for ourselves of being inclusive. We say we are. Now here's an opportunity of us making something special nationwide. Let's support this and get 100% behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a brilliant idea. I was recently at an event, well, actually, yeah, it was an event, at a restaurant with a couple of friends of mine who were both in wheelchairs and had mobility dogs. And the setup of that venue was such that those two people couldn't actually get to the counter to order their meals. So I had to take all their orders and go up to the counter and do it for them. And so I think that despite us all wanting to be an inclusive community, we actually have a lot more work to do in this space. And this is one of the ways that we can get it front of mind for people and for venues and get that ball rolling. Wheels move incredibly slowly in government, it turns out. And so sometimes decision makers need a wee bit of a push, to get things rolling. So on this occasion, I would be happy to support partnering with Mana Whai Kaha to get this happening. If we're able to keep PNCC's contribution at $10,000, in the grand scheme of things, that's actually a tiny investment that could dramatically improve the well-being of some of our most vulnerable and often most isolated people. So let's be trendsetters. Partner with Mana Whai Kaha, get it off the ground, gather the evidence, convince central government to come to the party after that.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Well, absolutely. What she said, that's fabulous. This council has a decent track record these days of trialling elements and partnering with government. We only have to look back last week at the success of our Welcoming Communities trial, where we partnered with government to deliver a programme to gather evidence to show that it works. And we decided that we would carry on despite what the government might or might not think about that. And I'd like to think this will fall into the same kind of category. I'd note we've been involved for a little while with the work that Arts Access Aotearoa has been doing in this space. The Globe has been doing some very good work to increase accessibility there, and elected members might remember the show last year, Up Down Girl, that council supported to increase access for our neurotypical communities. So this is not new work for us. It's a journey that we're on, and there is work to do, as Councillor Naylor said, to decrease barriers to access. And I think we will find that some of the barriers are financial for our community members and also for the organisations faced with wanting to do the right thing, but there being a real cost to that. Our lively art scene in Palmerston North often means that organisations are looking at full houses. Our theatres are often full. So comping tickets does actually come at a real cost to that organisation when you're giving away seats. And as we seek to change behaviour, I think it's appropriate that council might come in behind that to support that financial outlay. But there may also be financial implications for council itself as we look at the facilities that we offer in the community. And we all know that there are access issues around many of our cultural facilities. And I hope, as Rose said, that we might end up with 65 people in wheelchairs all trying to attend an event, but we have not got the facilities to deal with that, not just in terms of seating people, but the wider facilities that that would mean. And so when that report comes back at the 12-month stage, I think that will be an appropriate time to look at the implications for the venues around the city that are receiving increased levels of patronage from people with disabilities. And I'll be delighted to support this going forward.
Thank you. I'll just also add to the comments. I see that the Mayor has had to leave early, so on his behalf, I'm going to say it's a no-brainer. I mean, this has got all the components that constitute catnip to councils. Basically, it's a grassroots idea that's come from the community. It involves partnership with the community organisation. It involves including a portion of the community that's often isolated and excluded. And it's not going to cost a lot of money. So why would we not want to do it, really? So, and I just note that there are some organisations that already provide free tickets to companions of people with disabilities, one being the Esplanade Scenic Railway. Councillor Barrett, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. May not have waved my hand quite far enough into the air earlier, so but did want to comment certainly strongly in support of this, but wanted to just comment on a couple aspects. I'm quite perplexed even some of the commentary that we've heard in discussion here, but just perplexed as to why we would accept the venues and promoters sort of framing this as a revenue loss. I think that's quite a blinkered and short-sighted way of looking at it. And that actually, when you look at the numbers, certainly in our city, I'd say nothing could be further from the truth. There's actually a revenue opportunity here. We had some information just this morning about the numbers of people living with disability in the community, and they are significant. Currently, many of them choose not to go out for the very reason that we're going to solve here. So I actually think there's quite a bit of revenue opportunity here. I may need to compare with the Chair of Arts, Culture and Heritage around data after this, but certainly my understanding is that we quite often have underutilized space in our venues, and that many shows actually do have plenty of seats available that don't get sold. So this is a way to actually fill 2 of those seats, albeit at half price each, but those are seats that would otherwise be empty. This is a revenue opportunity. Secondly, I'm concerned that we don't sufficiently recognize in this report, and that we do have real potential to incentivize, and if necessary, to ensure that some of the venues that we own take this up. And I know there's been some comparison back to the New Zealand-wide scenario and why that was very difficult. Well, the very clear difference there is that there's no New Zealand-wide entity that actually owns the venues. We own the venues. Yes, softly to start, but ultimately, if we need to, we should be prepared to act so that we have a strong, inclusive approach in our community and bring every effort to bear to ensure that we deliver on that inclusive vision. So absolutely support where this is at now. If we need to go further, we should.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a small amendment to recommendation number 4. It's been suggested that it might be more suitable that the report back is to this committee rather than to council. Are you happy to support that, Councillor Bowen? Yeah, so if we could, with the indulgence of the committee, just change that. Thank you. Is there any further comment before we go to the vote? Is everyone happy to take all these 6 together? Okay, so we'll vote on recommendations 1 to 6 then, please. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right. So we'll move to item 13, which is the Papaoa Park Sports Pavilion Tenant Lounge Option Analysis. And that is going to be presented to us by Bryce Hosking and Kathy Deaver-Todd. Or even just Bryce. Welcome, Bryce.
Thank you. Yes, Kathy was tied up in a meeting. Apologies. So fortunately or unfortunately, you're just stuck with me. Relatively straightforward matter. As part of stage 3 of the Papaoa Place, or the potential stage 3 of the Papaoa Place development, a tenant lounge is also being discussed. There's currently 2 real options for that. One is to actually build a new one within the complex itself, or there is an opportunity to be utilising the Papaoa Park Sports Pavilion, sort of just next to the development itself, and actually doing a bit of work in there to be turning that into a dual-use facility. For the purpose of this report and getting some costings and putting some, I guess, a potential concept out there, we've made some assumptions that it could essentially be split off into a tenant lounge area and then also a sports pavilion area. However, I guess I would just make clear that that's only a conceptual idea. The alternative could be that it could just be one big open space as it is currently that could be used for both. However, when you do look at those kind of options, you do run into more booking issues and things along those lines. A sports pavilion is open to the general public, so if there was going to be some kind of function of the tenants occurring in that space, it would increase the likelihood of the general public or some sports facility users going in there as well. So a benefit of it being two separate areas is it does allow essentially even at the same time, but quite often it would allow for the tenant lounge to be occurring separately from the park activities. Yeah.
Thank you, Bryce. Questions? We've got Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Bryce. Just in regards to the sports pavilion in its current state, is it in a position that it can be used in the meantime until whatever, I guess, not preempting the outcome of this report, but understanding work needs to be done for it to be a more suitably comfortable venue for the tenants? But is it in a situation where it could be used in the meantime as is, or is it not appropriate?
Yeah, it is in a pretty poor condition, I suppose. Could it be used temporarily for that purpose? Yes. It probably doesn't meet the accessibility sort of standards, I guess, that we would like for some of the elderly residents in Papeoia. But if we were talking around sort of 6 months or something like that, if it was going to be used, yes, it could, but it isn't in the best of states, to be honest.
And then just to follow up, is if we were to go ahead with the signing this off through the long-term plan, taking into account how long works could possibly take, what timeframe would we actually be looking at for tenants to have a comfortable space?
Sure. If we were building a new one within Papeoia Place, obviously that would take considerably longer, building a brand new building. We're probably talking a couple of months renovation in reality.
Post sign-off of the long-term plan?
Correct.
Okay. And sorry, just one final question then is, has there been any communication with the tenants who are kind of leading this conversation around the fact that it could be used as an interim measure, but it is not the nicest spot for a social gathering?
Not specifically from me, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Budd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. I was just interested, is there a provision in the Reserve Act 1977 to put something strictly, vesting as a reserve, or normally or softly vesting as a reserve? Because I couldn't understand this 3.2.21, which says, although it's not strictly vested, but we are considering it as vested.
Yes. Well, ironically, probably a better question for Kathy, who's not here, talking about Reserves Act. But essentially, the Reserves Act it's quite strict on the rules and provisions for the different kind of reserve status of parks. But there's also quite a provision for if something's currently being used for a purpose. So it essentially gets the same rules get applied to that. So if a building is being used for a recreational purpose, then from council's point of view, if we're looking to consider an alternative use of that building, the same processes and same balance and checks that need to be done if it was on a recreational reserve would still need to be followed in this case. And the actual activities that can occur on certain kind of reserves, whether it be a local purpose reserve or a recreational one, it is quite prescriptive around the criteria that allows it to happen. And that was one of the biggest question marks around this, is given the actual status of the land, would that actually even allow this to actually occur in that space, and would it comply? And our Parks and Reserves team believe it does.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Bryce, for the report. Bryce, have we had a look in that whole area to see what other places like schools or what else is there for the tenants that they could use?
There are other alternatives. One that I believe got mooted when the deputation actually occurred was utilising the school hall at Terrace End. It is an option. The tenants did express some concerns that that would be a fair distance to be travelling, and given, I guess, the primary purpose of this is just for social interactions. You know, everything from playing cards and having a coffee type things like that. You know, there was I guess, a concern from the tenants that much further away than this starts to get a lot further away. Is it a possibility? Yes. Did we explicitly explore every single option in the area that could be used? No.
So just a follow-up question. So Bodell Flats are within that area. So what, they haven't got a tenant lounge, have they?
Yes, they do have a tenant lounge, and it does get used by the tenants in the complex sporadically, but it does get used.
So that tenant lounge, is it purpose-built for them, or is it is it one of the flats that we're now utilising as a?
I believe it is a flat that was converted into a lounge.
So have we through all our policies, like we've got quite a few of our areas, you know, we've got 411 rentals. So have we got a policy, like I was unaware within our policy of flats that this is something that we are now starting to do and taking away actually critical housing. You know.
There is a number of these that are historical. So we do have a couple of them around. Wood Street has one as well that actually was an old sort of villa that's being currently used as a tenant lounge.
And if I may just add to, I saw Wood Street when I did the whole visit with Debbie, and I mean that was in cobwebs, and they didn't even know it was there. And I'm just concerned. I'm just wondering whether we need to do a review of the whole thing, and should we have a policy for this? Because why should we have one set of service for one set of tenants and we haven't for another?
That's a decision for council if you want to be reviewing that. As I said, some complexes do have them. Some of the tenant lounges get used more and more often and better than others, and others don't get used that much at all.
And then depending on, okay. So just going back to the Bodell one, when was that, do you know when that was put in place?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay,
it has
thank
been
you.
there for some time though.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Bryce, for this report. So in 2.3, the report says that the stage 2 included the demolition of the tenants' lounge in the old hall. Prior to being demolished, was this tenants' lounge and old hall being used? And if so, how was that managed in terms of bookings, cleaning, security, furniture?
It was actually a couple of old units that basically were right next to each other. The wall in between was removed, and it made a sort of literally the two lounges butted onto each other to make an area of probably similar size to what we're looking to create or being proposed to be creating in this report. So it was actually another one of those situations that there was a couple of units. The hall was actually a separate thing altogether, and that was actually leased out to the Model Railway Club. But both of them, as part of stage 2, were demolished as part of that.
So then again, in terms of the tenants' lounge, how was that actually managed? Yeah.
The tenants were essentially managing it themselves.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Bryce, most of our facilities for especially older people have got some sort of facility there, like a lounge. Like I've spoken to the residents as a guest speaker 2 or 3 times in Waihi Place. That's quite well used, that one, isn't it? You get a book at weeks ahead, certainly.
as I said earlier, a number of there's a number of our complexes that have them. Some of them are utilised better than others.
And it's the residents that run the Waihi Place one, isn't it? The two of them book it and everything else.
Correct.
Thank you.
Bryce, just a question from me. Given that the pavilion is in such a poor physical condition, even for the purpose for which it's been used at the moment, is there any renewal budget that could be used to pay for some of these upgrades?
Nothing currently in this current financial year.
So in terms of long-term plan, we haven't got anything planned for renewals for this building?
So there is going to be a sports pavilion renewals budget being proposed as part of the LTP to be considered.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Okay, thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
So we've got two recommendations, that the memorandum be received and that stage 3 of the Papaioa Place redevelopment be referred to the long-term plan process. I'm happy to move those two. Councillor Bowen's happy to second, and we will open for comments. Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Older people do like to have social functions now and then, believe it or not. And for us to say, oh, you can go to the school hall, which is now a kilometre down the road, not many of them in Papaioa Place own their own car. A lot of them are on walkers, and some are on wheelchairs, and some are even on mobile scooters. Now, the old Papaioa Place had a lounge which was used for cards and other things and cup of coffees, and I know of other facilities in our portfolio alike where we have lounges that are used on a regular basis. I think of Elm Court. They have outside groups using that lounge where residents come and they have morning tea and they have guest speakers, and a lot of you councillors would have spoken there over the years. Pam Frith runs a group there that regularly meets there. Now, if those lounges weren't there, those meetings wouldn't happen. It's easier enough to say, oh, we'll go off to a school or go somewhere else. But for older people to move a couple of kilometres, it doesn't happen. We as good landlords should be looking after the best emotional value of our tenants. Our tenants need to be treated equally and with the facilities needed. The Papaioa Place units at the moment are brilliant. Have 4 people in for a game of 500. Try it. Even worse, have 2 teams of 500. 8 people. It's not going to happen. We're limiting our social ability of our tenants to be able to mingle. I don't think saying to this possibility of turning the sports pavilion into a social venue for our older people is going to be a major problem. It might cost us $100,000. But what's it worth for our older community to have a bit of social interaction, to make friends, and even have a birthday party? Try having a birthday party in one of the units that they are now. 5 or 6 people even. Let's not limit what our older people can do. Let's give them the ability to at least have some social interaction with their other residents and their friends and their family.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Finlay. We should treat all our elderly people equally. And we can get very emotional about it. But at the end of the day, all our ratepayers and residents are elderly. And a lot of them are in streets, and they haven't had $9 million spent on the state-of-the-art one-bedroom houses insulated. They're living in cold, shitty hovels, some of them. They haven't got a hall they can go to. They haven't got a lot of facilities. So why should we spend $4,000 per person in Papaioa when we've got to pick, I always get it, to pick the library in Highbury. Yeah, Tipa Tiki Tiki. Sorry, I just can't get it out. But the library in Highbury, we're going to have to make decisions about that area. We're going to have to make decisions about Kelvin Grove. And that's all elderly people in Kelvin Grove in their hall that they want upgraded. The Hokowhitu village, they're wanting money. And there's a huge amount of people in that area. They haven't got a hall. They haven't even got a library. So $350,000 is a hell of a lot of money when we haven't got it. And it's around priorities, and it's not because of some of these poor people, these poor elderly people. We have elderly people all over our city. And I think, I find it absolutely, I'm angry about it to think that we've got housing that we've had for community. We've got people in hotels, motels, when we could have been putting them into a couple of units at Papaioa. It horrifies me to think that we've got our priorities wrong. And there isn't a council policy around. I've never ever discussed anything around these units, that we've always looked and done all our maintenance and our upgrading. Not once has it ever been mentioned that we've got tenant lounges. And these tenant lounges at Papaioa, they weren't houses. They were rental properties that people could have been living in. And I mean, at least we've turned them into rentals now. So I think we've got to get our priorities right. And I'm sorry to go on about this, but I'm absolutely adamant we should not be spending $350,000 on upgrading a pavilion. We've got our other priorities, we've got other community centres, and we've got other elderly in our city that need a slice of this. It's $350,000 if you look in the...
Can we just respect the right of the person who's speaking and not interject, please, Councillor?
So I'd like to have that split out, please, because I will certainly not be supporting this going to that 10-year plan. I think this gives hope for people that they're going to get something when we shouldn't be giving them hope that we're putting it forward to a 10-year plan and we're going to spend $350,000 on 20 people in a lounge. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. Would anyone else like to comment? Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a tough one for me because I've always been a huge advocate for housing, and we definitely don't have enough housing in this town, and we definitely need a lot more. However, once stage 2 is complete, there will be 78 random, often vulnerable people living in beautiful but very small homes. We want these people to still have connection with the outside world. We want them to meet their neighbours, to talk about their grandkids, to check in on each other if somebody's not feeling well. And it's quite hard to do this. We heard from that deputation last month that they are struggling to do this. People are already falling into isolation in that space at the moment. We don't want these homes to become slums. So if we decide to renovate the pavilion to include a tenant's lounge, it actually needs to be a tenant's lounge. They need to feel like it's their space. Maybe we don't organise the bookings or the cleaning or the security or the furniture. Maybe we support and empower the residents to figure out how they would want a tenant's lounge to operate. And it feels like the tenants' lounges in each of these spaces have been ad hoc. So I would agree with looking at some sort of policy around how we treat all of these. And maybe the residents might have to do a bit of fundraising or start a little group of their own to sort of build up these tenants' lounge. Maybe it shouldn't be the council paying for it. I don't know. But I feel like there's a wider discussion that needs to happen there. And that comes down to our policies and how we treat all of these spaces. Because we don't want slums, but at the same time, we need more housing. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor.
Madam Chair, I do have a comment, but can I ask a quick question of clarification first, please?
Well, the time for doing that,
Yes.
Councillor, was during questions, so we're in comment now.
Yes, okay, well, I realise that, but just in terms of the comments that have been raised, I'll move to comment. I tend to agree with the views expressed by Councillor Beattie that at the moment, I wouldn't be supportive of recommendation 2, because I do think it sets up an expectation that is perhaps outside of our policy, what we've agreed on generally for our council housing. In this report, stage 3 appears to be defined as being a community, a tenant lounge. We had a report late last year that came to council, I think in September, that talked about a potential stage 3 that actually had some options. One was a tenant lounge and one actually had some additional units. If stage 3 to be considered in the long-term plan process actually equated to having some options, which included additional units, then I would be supportive of that being considered through the LTP. But I'm not supportive of stage 3 as it appears to be defined in this report being considered. And that was the clarity I would have liked to have had prior to voting on recommendation 2, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your comment, and I take that on board, but I have noticed a tendency to use questions in the comment session, which I'm just not going to be allowing generally. I wonder if I could just ask the officer, in terms of the stage 3 redevelopment being referred to the long-term plan, was that including the options that were presented to council last year, that stage 3 could be additional units, could be a green space, could be a community hall? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So that includes those options. Any further comment? Yes, Councillor Dennison.
Only in the fact that I'm going to support both recommendations. I've noticed that they've wanted to be separated. Stage 3 has only been referred to the long-term plan for consideration of all the scoping options. And I think we need to do that. And we don't need to make the decision here today. And I agree that, it's getting emotional. I think we all want the well-being of our residents, but housing is a pressing need and we need housing outcomes. And so without going on, I'm just saying I'm supporting 3. I don't see any problem with it. I didn't see the need to split it. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
It's a very quick comment, Madam Chair, just to take a slight exception to our houses being called slums. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay, are you back in the queue for another comment?
When we first looked at doing Papiaoa Place, and we looked at all the overseas studies from Germany, England and everywhere else, the one thing that came through every time was the fact there has to be a community centre, because otherwise they turn into an environment which is detrimental to the residents.
Thank you. I'm not going to add to the comments. I am actually, but I'm not. Well, I don't want to just sit on the fence, but this is a very difficult situation to consider fairness for all of the older people in the city, to consider what our tenants need. There's clearly a desire from tenants to have lounges, given that they're repurposing rental units for that, which I agree is concerning. So I think Councillor Dennison has probably hit the nail on the head by saying this is something that we can consider, along with the level of service for all our residential units during the long-term plan. And maybe we can work on what our policy is concerning tenant lounges to make sure that we're being fair in our allocations. And I think something that we do need to try and be consistent about for fairness. So I think we'll just leave it at that. Are people still wishing for 1 and 2 to be separated? Yes, okay. And a division. Thank you. I assume that recommendation 1 we can just take on the voices? Yep. Okay, so let's just vote on recommendation 1 on the voices. All in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against?
Madam Chair, I'm just going to abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay, I was just going to call for abstentions. Abstentions? 1. Thank you. So recommendation 1 is carried. Recommendation 2 we'll do by division. I'll get governance to pull that out.
Councillor Butt.
Against?
Against. Councillor Dingwall.
4.
4. Councillor Barrett.
4.
4. Councillor Rutherford.
4.
4. Councillor Johnson.
4.
4. Councillor Meehan.
4.
4. Councillor Hancock.
4.
4. Councillor Dennison.
4.
4. Councillor Petrunus.
4.
4. Councillor Naylor.
4.
4. Councillor Finlay.
4.
4. Councillor Beattie. Against. Councillor Bowen. 4.
Thank you. That is carried. 11 votes for, 2 against, and an abstention from Councillor Hubter. Yep. Thank you. Councillors, we're at the 2-hour mark. We have got another report and then the work schedule. I would propose that we break now for lunch. Is everybody agreeable to that? And we will come back at 1:45 to resume. So we'll adjourn till then. Thank you.